Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the opening plenary of Decolonizing Our Campuses, Students Unite Against Oppression. My name is Rafif Ziada, and I will be introducing as well as moderating our conversation for today. I wanted to start off by thanking the organizers of this marvelous conference. There's always a lot of work that goes behind the scenes in pulling so many people together. We have people viewing us from New Zealand all the way to Toronto, so it's really quite incredible and amazing. And I want to thank the organizers for bringing us together at this very critical time where due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us are under lockdown and many of our campuses are closed. It's much harder to connect. So it's wonderful to find this space because we are in dire need of communication and organizing. While the dynamics of the pandemic have really laid bare the existing inequalities and destructive forces of racial capitalism, some states have quickly moved to ensure that it's actually an opportunity in order to buttress militarism, surveillance, and privatization. And very sadly, many university administrations have followed suit, and we have seen the appalling treatment of students as if they are ATM machines only there to pay for tuition or pay the rents for accommodation. In this appalling situation, it is really incumbent upon us to continue organizing, to make sure that decolonizing our campuses is not simply a metaphor for tinkering with the curriculum, but that it's actually a fundamental shift to ensuring that we build our movements and our alliances stronger, that we see the intersections and the interconnections between us and the links between climate justice, social justice, economic justice, and freedom for all. And in saying this, I think it's wonderful that such a call for a conference on boycotts, divestments, and sanctions is coming from Palestine, a place that has suffered under Israeli settler colonialism for decades now, but still ensuring that the call for decolonizing campuses are coming right from that space that is still resisting settler colonialism to this day. So thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin our conversation, I just wanted to say a few housekeeping things before I introduce our marvelous speakers for today. There will be interpretation in Arabic and Spanish. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little interpretation button. So if you would like interpretation in Arabic or Spanish, please press on that button. You can select the language that you want. Please note that Camilla will be speaking in Spanish, so you might have to switch over to English when she's speaking. This plenary is being streamed live on the BDS Movement's English, Spanish, and Arabic language Facebook pages, and we will be taking questions on these Facebook pages if that's how you are watching us today. There will be space for question and answer at the end. There is a Q&A button also at the bottom of the screen. Please use that in order to ask us questions, and I will try my hardest to make sure there's enough room for discussion and questions at the end. Having said that, within the conference, there's quite a bit of room for conversations and discussions and chats, so please don't think this is the final opportunity. So to start off with our speakers, and I'm really grateful for all of them for making the time to join us today. They all have remarkable organizing experiences, whether in academic boycott or divestment campaigns, and we really will be gaining a lot from listening to them today. Our first speaker, this is just in order of introductions, not how they will speak, but our first speaker will be Darashti, who organized with the Brown Divestment Campaign, calling upon Brown University to divest from companies complicit in Israel's apartheid and occupation. She's now pursuing a master's in urban and social policy at Columbia University. Jeremy Phillips served as chairperson of the Palestine Solidarity Forum at the University of Cape Town and was involved in the campaign for a boycott of complicit Israeli academic institutions. He is now a postgraduate student at the University of Fort Hare. Anwar is a Palestinian-Italian student and activist. She is part of the Progetto Palestina student group at the University of Turin, promoting the academic boycott of complicit Israeli universities. Camila Matar Hasboun is a lawyer with a degree in human rights from the Universidad Astrul de Chile. I hope I'm pronouncing all this correctly. I'm not a Spanish speaker, my apologies. She's a third generation Palestinian descendant and is active in the Arab Youth of Palestine and BDS Chile. So as you see, we have a panel that spans most places where there is BDS, people who've been involved in very exciting organizing that we will all be learning from today. We will kick off the conversation with a discussion of the academic boycott on campuses. And just to say a little bit about the academic boycott, for decades, Israeli universities have played a key role in planning, implementing, and justifying Israel's occupation and apartheid policies, while also maintaining a uniquely close relationship to the Israeli military industry. They are involved in developing weapons, but also in developing the moral and the legal arguments for some of Israel's behaviors and policies against the Palestinian population. Therefore, Palestinian civil society called for a boycott of these complicit Israeli institutions, pointing a spotlight to this type of academic complicity. And as we are speaking of decolonizing our campuses today, it's very important that we look at these levels of complicity between all our universities and the military industrial complex wherever we are. Of course, thousands of academics have signed petitions supporting the academic boycott from South Africa, the US, the UK, India, Sweden, Ireland, Brazil, and Belgium, and Italy. Many academic associations have also adopted the academic boycott of complicit Israeli institutions. It is an institutional boycott, and it is really there to highlight this type of ongoing complicity. So not seeing universities as these ivory towers that sit outside of society, but looking at all of the interconnections and the links between universities, racial capitalism, and ongoing settler colonialism. So this is the broad overview of what the academic boycott is about. And so without further ado, I'll call on our first speaker to give a little bit of his experience at UCT Academic Boycott Campaign. Jeremy?
Great. Thank you very much. Just checking, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Coming through, perfect. First, let me also thank the organizers for this event, this panel. It's very exciting and much needed. I'm going to be speaking to the academic boycott campaign, which was run at the University of Cape, it's still ongoing at the University of Cape Town. And for this initial session, let me first just give some context and a bit of chronology and outline the victories and achievements that were attained through this academic boycott campaign. Academic boycott is not a new demand at UCT. It was a campaign initiated by the Palestine Solidarity Forum, which was the student Palestine organization, society at our university. And it, as a demand, it had been on the table for a while, but this was really the first time there was a focused and really dedicated campaign around the academic boycott. We, as the Palestine Solidarity Forum, a group of students, we initiated the campaign towards the end of 2016, around about this time in 2016. And when we initiated it, there were perhaps two main objectives we had in mind at the time. The first, obviously, was to implement an academic boycott of Israel, of the complicit Israeli universities. The second was also we viewed it as a platform with which to educate and politicize and conscientize students and staff and workers at the university around Palestine and the Palestinian struggle. And when we initiated it, our first step was to take stock of the political landscape at the university and assess the territory. And though in previous years across South African universities, there had been mass student protests and mass worker protests as well. Our assessment really, the balance of forces, was there wasn't that kind of groundswell of support for Palestine as there were for sort of socioeconomic issues in South Africa. And so the first sort of strategic decision we made as we initiated was to really I suppose, submit our campaign in the form of a proposal to the established university structures, and follow the procedures and protocols that had already been established by the university. And so having decided that as our strategy, as our sort of overarching strategy for the academic boycott campaign, we quite, I think, cleverly maneuvered it onto the university agenda. And just to give some detail to it, what was determined, the process determined by the university to decide whether it would adopt an academic boycott as its official position, was that it would be our motion for the boycott would be heard by 3 committees. First, the Academic Freedom Committee, then the University Senate, and then the University Council. And if Council adopted the academic boycott as a resolution, then it would become official university policy. And so we went about drafting our campaign into the form of a proposal, and it was really based on the PACB guidelines, which are available on the PACB website. And that really was how we structured our demands. But as we submitted it to the first committee, the Academic Freedom Committee, I'll call them the AFC, we started engaging with progressive comrades on that committee, and they immediately told us that even the PACB guidelines, as reasonable as they are, would be too radical for the university. And so our stance at that point was to continue ahead with our original motion based on the PACB guidelines, but simultaneously get comrades sitting on that committee to draft a secondary proposal which would appear less threatening and perhaps more palatable to the university. And the terms of that was that UCT, our university, not enter into relations with any Israeli universities occupying and operating in the occupied Palestinian territories, or any other Israeli university enabling the gross violation of human rights in the Palestinian territories. And our view was, in some ways it seems like a compromise, but our view was that it's malleable enough to cover all the complicit universities, while in some ways seeming less threatening than the original motion. And sure enough, the Academic Freedom Committee adopted that, their own sort of resolution based on Palestinian territories, and that almost became the central and key boycott resolution. It then went to the University Senate, as was determined, the second step in the process, and Senate, which is comprised of the university professoriate, sort of delayed, and they had the inevitable problems with quorum and procedural objections all along the way. But ultimately, they adopted this academic boycott, which was proposed by the AFC based on the Palestinian territories. And that really was the high point of our academic boycott campaign, because though it was not official university policy, by being adopted by the University Senate, it almost gained the status of an implicit, unspoken rule of the university. It was almost like soft policy at UCT. And then the final step was, and this is I'm speaking through it quickly, but these are years in between each steps. The final step was the motion then went to the University Council, where the odds were really against us. And at that meeting, the council didn't adopt the academic boycott, the proposal as it was put before, but neither did it reject it. Instead, it declined to vote on it, and instead adopted its own separate resolution, which condemned Israel's apartheid practices and I can't remember the exact wording, but opened the university up in the future to adopt an academic boycott. And so not quite the major success we were hoping for, but it still allows us to reinitiate and relaunch at any point. And so at this point, we've sort of come to the end of perhaps the main thrust of our academic boycott campaign. Perhaps it will turn out to be the end of the first thrust, and there'll be a second one later. But even at this point, in hindsight, after 4 years of campaigning, there have been some major victories, which I'll just quickly outline as well. Though the boycott itself wasn't adopted as official policy, it was adopted by two committees, the Academic Freedom Committee and the University Synod. And in that way, almost a soft policy. Certainly, it's hard to believe, it would be nearly impossible for the university in the future to enter into relations with Israeli universities, even if it isn't official policy. Certainly, if it does, there would be enormous backlash against it. The second victory is in relation to our initial objective, which was education and politicization. The academic boycott afforded us this fantastic platform to bring about and publicize the Palestinian struggle on campus, but also because of really its unprecedented nature, it gained national and even international attention. And so that really drew a fantastic amount of attention to the Palestinian struggle. And in that way, I think we were really successful, far better than we could have ever imagined in politicizing our community, local and national, on the Palestinian struggle. And then finally, really unexpectedly, I suppose as a compromise from management, it adopted a resolution to invest, I'm not sure the exact amount, but a significant amount of money in establishing relations with Palestinian universities, which at no point was really a demand of ours, but always something that we were hoping might come about, but really wasn't put on the table by us. And so ultimately, with those were really three major victories. And though it wasn't perhaps the fantastic academic boycott with the huge headlines, it is really a great step forward in international Palestinian solidarity, and with potential and really the platform for us to keep on moving forward at UCT in South Africa and really in the world.
Thank you so much for that very thorough explanation. And I think it really raises important questions around, you said there were years between those steps. And I think something that keeps coming back in student organizing is the question of sustainability. And what do you do when students move on? And I think this will be a discussion throughout the next 3 days. But I also think it's important that it's not, you mentioned the educational goal that was achieved through this campaign, and quite often we're always pushed towards end goals, like did we achieve the golden thing at the end? But I think we shouldn't underestimate the importance of using academic boycott in this way as an educational tool. And I think in most academic boycott campaigns I've been involved in, this way of opening up space for education through a specific campaign is really useful, and is really goes to the heart of how the campaign works. So thank you so much for that analysis and for walking us through those steps, which I'm sure amounted to hours and hours of strategy discussions and conversations. And we're going to be discussing divestment campaigns now on campuses, because that's been another way of doing boycotts, divestment, and sanctions on campuses. One arm of the work has been the academic boycott, but the other section has been the divestment campaigns. And this takes many shapes and forms. Sometimes it's divesting from particular corporations. On my university campus, there was the G4S, for example, had a contract. Caterpillar sometimes has contracts. So sometimes it's about divesting from specific contracts. Other times it's actually working through the trade unions and the pension funds to see where they are invested, so there can be divestment in that way. And the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign has had major successes with ensuring that certain corporations have lost contracts, complicit corporations, but also that there have been divestments at various levels in pension plans as well. This is very long-term work. It's not overnight kind of work, but it's really important. And now we are seeing the interconnections with other movements as well, like the climate justice movement and divesting from the fossil industry, for example. So I think there's many links to be built across our movements nowadays, looking at these corporations and also investigating pension funds on campuses. I don't want to go on about it because I think we have speakers that have really launched very interesting divestment campaigns on their campuses. So we're going to turn to Brown University now to get that experience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the organizers of this event. Hi, everyone. My name is Drashti. I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island in the US. Often I think as students, it's hard to visualize social and economic change. It's even more difficult to imagine that you can contribute to it. But what I found throughout undergrad was that divestment is a powerful avenue through which we can pressure our institutions to not only stop condoning, but to stop profiting from human rights violations. You know, it signals that we, as students, we're taking responsibility in examining our institutions' actions and making them do so as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Brown Divestment Campaign, which was organized by of undergraduate students at Brown to identify and divest from companies that profit from Israeli violations of human rights. You know, we believe that Brown University, in supporting such companies through financial transactions, is complicit in the crimes against Palestinians. So ultimately, before we kind of launched our campaign, we did a lot of the background and research work to really dig deep and analyze what types of companies that we wanted to target. And ultimately, we devised 5 criteria to judge these companies, which are all grounded in international human rights law. That kind of, was asking which companies, provides products and services that either serve to maintain and or expand, for example, Israeli settlements or the separation wall or the occupation and much more. And we did some research and found we have a list of companies which you can find on our website, browndivest.org. But for example, one of them is Caterpillar, and that's probably one that many of us know that, since 1967 and even before, thousands and thousands of homes have been demolished by the Israeli military. And we know that Caterpillar in specific, sells bulldozers to the IDF, knowing that they're going to unethically and unlawfully demolish Palestinian homes and endanger Palestinians. And we saw Caterpillar all over our university, so we knew we had, at the very least, we had contracts with them. And so what we did was, in February of 2019, we launched our campaign through a video, a wall demonstration on our campus. And I really resonated with what Jeremy said, because after we launched all the way up to March, we had a variety of events with different campus groups to really launch an educational component of the campaign as well, to really interact and host a dialogue with our peers at our university to look at this issue through an intersectional lens. Meaning, so for example, we hosted events with other student groups like the Kashmir Solidarity Movement. So we analyzed, a comparative analysis of the 2 occupations from Kashmir to Palestine. We also partnered with the Brown Immigrants' Rights Coalition to talk about surveillance in the US and Palestine. We talked about, the use of tear gas in Ferguson and the US-Mexico border and Palestine. So we really wanted to connect it with a lot of other struggles and movements that people were interested in, and really build solidarity together. Ultimately, in March of 2019, the student body overwhelmingly voted to support divestment at a 69% vote, which was actually one of the highest voter turnouts that our university even ever had, which really demonstrated the breadth of interest on campus to divest from these companies. And after the student referendum, hundreds of faculty and alumni actually signed petitions and wrote letters to support divestment. And to kind of almost wrap up, after the referendum, after we had the student, faculty, and alumni support, we actually initiated the logistical and formal procedure of obtaining a recommendation on divestment through a student. There's a group called ACRIP on our university, which is the official forum through which divestment campaigns proceed. And they have to analyze it. They spend months analyzing it, and they launch a formal recommendation to the university president and the corporation, who will decide the final vote. So, we went to ACRIP, and presented it all throughout the fall of 2019. And then finally in spring 2020, so this past spring, on March 10th to be specific, the committee actually published a report recommending divestment. And so we became the first Ivy League in the United States to recommend divestment. And they voted, with over a 2/3 majority to recommend that to our president and the corporation. And I just want to end with a small quote from them. They said that, any company that profits from the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land is complicit in human rights abuses. If Brown University is directly invested in such companies, it certainly has a moral duty to break any financial relations with them. We believe that recommending divestiture is the most appropriate response to the severe social harm experienced by the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you. That's quite a remarkable quote to end on, and such a victory as well. Congratulations for the committee for all the work you've done. And again, I think you've highlighted the research work that goes into really analyzing and choosing those targets for divestment that we speak about, but also the building of coalitions. And interestingly, with the referendum, most of the time when we go to the student body and explain what these corporations are doing, the student body tends to vote on side if we are allowed and able to actually express what the campaign is. And that's why I think there's such a silencing campaign to make sure we don't get to that stage. But I think it's so valuable to be able to present, and those referendums I think are a very good indication that the student bodies are usually on side if we manage to get the information out there. I think the next experience we'll be turning to is Camilla from Chile. And just to remind people if they want to switch the interpretation as well. Camilla.
Disculpen, hola, hello, I'm from Chile, so I will speak Spanish because I don't prepare something in English to make it very good, so I will talk in Spanish. Gracias a todas y a todos, gracias por la invitación, es un honor para mí estar aquí con todas ustedes, con todos los que están presentes en esta actividad. Y voy a hablar un poco acerca, en términos generales, de las campañas de BDS académico que se han llevado a cabo en Chile, en 3 universidades que están presentes en el territorio chileno. Y estas 3 universidades hay 2 que están ubicadas en Santiago, que es la región metropolitana, la capital de Chile, y la tercera universidad, que es muy interesante, está ubicada en el sur de Chile, y esta universidad tiene gran importancia, al igual que las otras 2, en términos de desarrollo económico, desarrollo del conocimiento, innovación, investigación, se realizan muchos intercambios internacionales, y esta universidad es la más importante del sur de Chile, está posicionada como una de las universidades con rol público en nuestro país, y por lo tanto estos 3 polos, estos 3 espacios donde se declararon en algún sentido libre de apartheid, son muy importantes para todas y todos, no solo para jóvenes o estudiantes, sino que para el desarrollo obviamente de tecnologías, desarrollo en cuanto a conocimiento en estos territorios, y por eso ha sido muy importante el trabajo que se ha venido desarrollando, tanto en la Universidad de Chile, la Universidad Católica, Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile también, y la Universidad Austral de Chile, que es la universidad que está ubicada en mi ciudad, donde yo vivo, en Valdivia, al sur de Chile. Y esta universidad desarrolló este proceso durante 3 años, donde primero se hicieron actividades de información, actividades para primero poder educar, informar a las personas en las mismas carreras de la universidad. La universidad tiene hoy en día más de 40 carreras, por lo tanto hubo un trabajo arduo para poder visitar cada espacio dentro de la universidad, donde se informaba acerca de qué es el BDS, qué significan las siglas del BDS, boicot, desinversión y sanciones, ¿cierto? Y cuáles son los objetivos del BDS, las estrategias que tiene el BDS. Por lo tanto, primero hubo un trabajo de información en el campus de la Universidad Austral de Chile, y a través de 3 federaciones de estudiantes distintas, ya que todos los años se elige una nueva federación de estudiantes que representa obviamente a todas y a todos quienes están en la casa de estudios, y por eso la importancia de este órgano como un órgano político, un órgano como es la Federación de Estudiantes, que no solo se preocupa de los temas académicos de los estudiantes, sino que también es un órgano que se vincula con el medio, se vincula con la sociedad chilena y aporta también a las demandas que tiene la sociedad chilena en cuanto a mayor justicia, igualdad, libertad, en cuanto a la consagración de derechos sociales, de derechos humanos, como el derecho a la educación, a la salud, a la vivienda, y también los derechos de la naturaleza, ¿cierto? Cuando hablamos de los recursos naturales, ya que a pesar de que se sabe que en Chile hay mucha agua, el recurso del agua es muy abundante, tenemos una crisis hídrica, tenemos graves problemas de escasez de agua porque las grandes empresas se apropian de este bien que en realidad no es de todas y todos, sino que es un bien de uso privado, y que deja a muchos y a muchas personas y poblaciones sin el acceso al agua. Por lo tanto, quería contextualizar un poco también la realidad que vivimos en Chile y por qué el BDS y la causa palestina es tan importante para nosotras y nosotros. En distintos espacios se ha desarrollado mucho este trabajo de la causa palestina con organizaciones sociales, organizaciones políticas, organizaciones de derechos humanos. Por lo tanto, por ese lado nosotros tenemos la forma de vincularnos con otras organizaciones y grupos de personas para poder informar acerca de lo que es el BDS, que la verdad, en el caso de Valdivia, que es la primera universidad sobre la que estoy comentando, son hartos años de trabajo, no solo a nivel universitario, sino que a nivel de la ciudad y la región de donde habito, que es Valdivia, y la región de los ríos. Se ha desarrollado también un lobby político con autoridades como alcaldes, con autoridades regionales, y también trabajando y haciendo muchas manifestaciones, protestas en los espacios públicos de la ciudad, no solo dentro de la universidad. Por lo tanto, el desarrollo del BDS académico como tal comenzó hace 3 años y finalmente se logró que todo el estudiantado, que todos los estudiantes de la Universidad Austral de Chile declararan este espacio como un espacio libre de apartheid. Se cumplió el quórum, que el quórum es la cantidad de votos que necesitas para que una decisión sea vinculante y obligue a todas y a todos. Por eso se alcanzó este quórum que dice, que señalan los mismos estatutos de la Federación de Estudiantes, y se obtuvo que 36 carreras de la Universidad Austral de Chile votaran a favor de declararse un espacio libre de apartheid. Y este fue un triunfo no solo obviamente dentro de nuestro territorio, sino que para el BDS logramos que se hiciera de la forma en que la norma, digamos, el reglamento establecía, y por eso fue un trabajo arduo, pero que logramos que 3 federaciones de estudiantes además declararan y apoyaran el BDS. También en la ciudad de Santiago, como les mencionaba, la Pontificia Universidad Católica también ha hecho un trabajo muy importante de BDS académico a través de la Organización de Solidaridad con Palestina, las siglas OSP, donde ellos desde el año 2016 decidieron llevar a cabo la campaña de BDS académico en su casa de estudios, la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, y el objetivo era que esta institución cortara los vínculos ya existentes con 2 universidades con las que mantenía vínculos de intercambio, la Universidad Hebrea de Jerusalén y el Instituto Tecnológico de Israel Technion. La moción fue presentada frente al Consejo de Federación, compuesto por la Federación de Estudiantes y todos los representantes estudiantiles. de esta casa de estudios, consejería académica, consejerías territoriales y centros de estudiantes de cada carrera. ¿Por qué votaron en el Consejo de la Federación y no en las urnas? Esto es porque hay un riesgo muy grande, existe grupos sionistas que tienen mucha fuerza también dentro de la Universidad Católica, y por eso se inició un mes de campaña que se prolongó todo el mes de septiembre, mediante correos y otras formas. Se organizaron foros informativos y debates, y bueno, en la otra ronda de conversación voy a contar un poco acerca de más detalles sobre estas campañas, pero por ahora voy a hablarlo más en términos generales. Y respecto a la tercera universidad, que es la Universidad de Chile, que es una universidad pública, la UGEP, la Unión General de Estudiantes Palestinos, inició el proceso de campaña La Chile Libre de Apartheid, que comenzó el año 2019, pero por razones de el estallido social, ¿cierto? La revuelta social que comenzó en Chile en octubre del año 2019, se tuvo que detener el proceso hasta el año 2020 y se tuvo que realizar de forma virtual el proceso de campaña para permitir que la Universidad de Chile adhiriera al boicot y cesara los vínculos que mantiene con diversas universidades israelíes. Y bueno, el 17 y 18 de agosto del año 2020 se llevó a cabo un plebiscito levantado por la misma organización de la UGEP en paralelo a las elecciones de la Federación de Estudiantes de la Universidad de Chile, en el cual se le consultó a todos los estudiantes si querían cesar los vínculos de la Casa de Estudios con las universidades israelíes que contribuyen efectivamente con el apartheid israelí y la ocupación ilegal de Palestina. Por lo tanto, para ir terminando, en resumidas cuentas, Chile es un país muy diverso, es un país que su geografía es muy largo, muy extenso, y por lo tanto es muy importante este trabajo de coordinación que se ha desarrollado. Es muy importante que estemos en directa comunicación con el BNC, con todos ustedes. Para nosotros, para mí además es un honor estar en esta actividad, el poder realizar actividades en conjunto, y que puedan conocer un poco sobre las campañas que se están todavía incluso desarrollando en estas universidades. Por lo que entiendo, ninguna de estas tres campañas ha terminado, están en proceso. Entendemos las dificultades que hay, todas las dificultades que pueden existir incluso en las leyes chilenas, que podrían en el fondo avalar ciertas posturas que mantienen los grupos sionistas, pero en la otra ronda les puedo contar un poco sobre esas dificultades y de qué formas podríamos salir de esas dificultades. Yo creo que eso es lo importante, aprender de todas y todos los procesos de campaña que se han llevado alrededor del mundo y seguir fortaleciéndolos y no detenernos, aunque tengamos derrotas, no importa, porque hay que seguir trabajando el BDS y seguir luchando por contribuir a la liberación de Palestina. Así que gracias a todas y todos. Saludos.
Thank you so much, Camilla, for that wonderful intervention. For me, it's very heartening as somebody who started organizing a while back, when it was one or two campuses that were speaking about boycotts and divestments, to now see this geographical spread of how much the campaigns have grown and how much more organized they are. You guys are all definitely way more organized than we were when we started off. So that's really heartening to see. And I think this particular example really tells us about that crucial connection between what happens on campus and off campus, to be aware of the social movements and the organizing, not to think of the campus space as this enclosed space onto itself, but in connection with all the social movements around, which I think sometimes we miss when we're in that university space because everything is so internal. But the example of Chile really shows us the importance of ensuring that Palestine and boycotts, divestments, or sanctions are there in support and in solidarity of other struggles going on as well, that we're not just there on our own marching ahead, but that we really understand and stand in solidarity with other social movements that are around. And now we're transitioning from Chile to Italy, and Anwar will be speaking to us about that experience.
Thank you. Good evening to all. My name is Anwar, and I'm a Palestinian student at the University of Turin in Italy, where I'm part of a group of students called Progetto Palestina that aims to spread discussions and knowledge about Palestine and to promote BDS in the academic context and beyond. We made a lot of different activities in these last 4 years, like academic seminars funded by the university, film club, demonstrations, and other actions. But today I would like to focus on a specific action and campaign that started in 2016. And I will try to summarize what happened at that time. Everything starts from a call signed and launched by many professors and researchers in the Italian academic world. The Stop Technion call aimed to stop any kind of collaboration between Italian university and the Technion of Haifa, the same university that Camilla, I think, was talking about before. 350 professors and researchers signed the call. So we decided to respond as students to this call, and we created the campaign Students Against Technion. Our power was that the academic boycott campaign was supported by students, professors, and researchers. And more than 60 professors and researchers were from the University of Turin. And this was an amazing resource for our work and our campaign. Our main aim was to create support and to promote the campaign between our colleagues. The support of other groups and associations of students was essential to our work. And we constructed together a space where we could work and where we could let the students be aware of what was happening in Palestine. We were able to engage more than 1,500 students in less than 1 month. And I think that this was our best success. And in order to this, I think that I have to focus on our strategy. So we wanted to spread the boycott campaign to the largest possible number of students. So we created a petition to let every student get involved and aware about what was happening. We wanted our university to refuse these agreements, and we asked with our petition to stop any kind of collaboration with the Technion of Haifa. At that time, the university was covered with this brochure explaining the campaign, our aim, and how to support us and get involved. They were everywhere. They were also in the books of the library. And every day at the campus, there was a desk with a Palestinian flag, food, coffee, and students were attracted to know what was happening and to talk with us. So we became a sort of a meeting point for university students. Thanks to the mobilization and student support, together we were able to let the Students' Council of University, that was the first one in Italy, to approve a motion supporting the academic boycott and asking for the boycott of the agreements with the Technion. I will tell you the end of the story quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but it's not an happy ending because the academic senate, due to the pressure received, decided to refuse to boycott Israeli criminal universities. But in order to come back to the first point, the most important thing was that we were able to create supporters at our university. Students, professors, and researchers that are still supporting us and helping us nowadays to grow up. We faced a lot of pressures And I think that I will talk about it more in the second round, so I will give space to others to talk about their experience.
Thank you so much, Anwar. Everybody's now eager for the next session, and it sounds like it's all going to be the problems faced, but it's actually about how we overcome those challenges that in our organizing. And it sounds like all of you have really developed marvelous ways to take on these challenges, but also reflect on them and decide how to move forward in very creative ways. I always love any sign of brochures and that type of material. Most people might not know, but in one of the earliest Israeli apartheid weeks, it was during the war on Gaza, and one of the posters actually got banned. It was a poster of a Palestinian child with a helicopter coming at him. And it was banned on all university campuses in Canada at the time. And the response was, we made stickers of the poster, and the stickers went everywhere, all across Canadian campuses. So this is one interesting way with material and art, I think, to integrate it into everything that we do. It is a space where I find sometimes when students might be a bit shy or afraid to come up to the table and ask questions, this kind of material and brochures is a really good way of interacting. The other thing that really struck me as you were all speaking is the building of alliances across the campus between academics and students and the trade unions on the campus. And I think in most cases that I know about, successful campaigns have been built because of such alliances that are along all of the trade unions on the campus. And sometimes we think that a university is just about the students and the academics, but it's also all the staff, all of the workers that keep the place running. And successful BDS campaigns, whether divestment or academic boycott, are when we bring together everyone on campus with the community outside. I think those for me have been really the highlights. And in all of your examples, you've really spoken and touched on how you worked with academics, how you reached out to staff in very interesting ways for your campaigns. I just wanted to note to everybody who's watching us, we have around 300 people following us so far. So in the middle of a pandemic, with everything going on in the world, I think 300 people tuning into a conversation about Free Palestine and work on campuses is really inspiring and really great. And once more, kudos to the organizers for pulling us all together. So without further ado, to launch into our next section around some of the challenges you faced in campaigning and how you've overcome them. And Anwar, you're actually the first one on the list in this time round.
Okay, perfect. So as I was saying before, we have been the first university in Italy to create such a big academic mobilization supporting the BDS. And obviously our university and professors received a lot of pressure from the upper level. And this pressure coming from Zionist lobbies and the Israeli embassy was reflected on us. Because while we were growing, the university started to deny us spaces for our events. And this was one of the biggest problems that we face, because we were facing censorship from our university. But thanks to the support and the relation that we created between our colleagues, we have been able to take action. We simply occupy spaces that have been denied for us. We were able to do this thanks to many other students that supported us. And since this experience, we understood that the most important thing for our work is to build links and create solidarity between movements, between different groups. So we started to organize events with different topics, collaborating with feminist group, LGBTQ+ association, with the Black Lives Matter community, with students talking about their experience in Rojava and so on. And these links have been important for our work inside and outside the university. Obviously, also nowadays, we are facing censorship and pressure, but we are now more used to it and we are more powerful than before. Another aspect that I would like to point out is the collaboration between students group working for Palestine in different universities in Italy. So we wanted our campaign, Students Against Technion, to become a national campaign. So we started searching for contacts in other universities, and we organized events in different cities to talk about our experience and about the BDS movement and about our campaign. Our aim was to create a national students campaign, and this was possible thanks to another leading students group from the University of Cagliari that worked with us and supported us. So while we were growing in the University of Turin, also the students group from the University of Cagliari promoted the campaign by events, demonstrations, and other actions that pointed out the criminal agreements. This amazing experience was so unexpected that our presidents of universities and our Ministry of Education had to take a flight to Tel Aviv to explain that they were unaware and averse about our actions. And obviously, they signed other agreements between Italian and Israeli universities. But I think that this was not a sign of failure, but a sign of success, because our action, mobilization, campaign strength scared them. So I think that we have to keep working like this. We have to create not only a national, but an international network for students working on the BDS in order to support each other and give advice. I think that these kinds of events are amazing because they permit us to know each other, to find similarities in our experience, and to learn from each other. So thank you again for organizing this panel, and thank you for inviting me to talk.
Thank you so much, Anwar. Camila?
Hola, gracias. Bueno, en esta oportunidad voy a hablar un poco más acerca, en detalle, de las campañas que se llevaron a cabo. Primero respecto a la UGEP, que es la Unión General de Estudiantes Palestinos, que se desarrolla en la Universidad de Chile. Ellos tuvieron igual complicaciones por la contracampaña sionista, ya que levantaron campañas de odio en contra de la UGEP, exigiendo tener espacio en el Consejo de Federación para mostrar su postura y realizar una especie de debate con ellos. También una compañera sufrió acoso virtual, siendo víctima de constantes difamaciones y acusaciones falsas en su contra. Y así, realmente la comunidad sionista de Chile actúa con mucha violencia, actúa con mucha agresividad ante cualquier tipo de actividad que obviamente cuestione al Estado de Israel y que se le declare como lo es, un Estado que practica el apartheid, un Estado que ocupa un territorio ilegalmente y que incumple totalmente el derecho internacional de los derechos humanos respecto a los palestinos. Cuando hablamos en Chile con la verdad, aparecen estos grupos de odio para intentar invalidar o deslegitimar lo que es el BDS, el movimiento BDS, que como todos sabemos es un movimiento pacífico, ¿cierto?, de boicot y que por lo demás ha tenido mucha efectividad en sus acciones que ha llevado alrededor del mundo. A pesar de todas estas dificultades que tuvo la UGEP para poder desarrollar la campaña, finalmente en las votaciones donde se tenía que decidir mediante un plebiscito si es que los estudiantes adherían o no al BDS, lograron sacar 3.400 votos a favor, lo cual representa un 76,5% de los votos emitidos en dicho plebiscito. El problema que hubo es que no alcanzaron el quórum, el número de votos, ¿cierto?, para validar la votación. Y esto ocurrió a nivel macro porque la misma Federación de Estudiantes de la Chile no logró el quórum para la votación. Ha habido una crisis de participación política de los estudiantes y por eso no alcanzaron finalmente el quórum para que esta fuera una decisión vinculante, resolutiva, que obligue a todas y a todos. A contrario de lo que pasó en Valdivia, que claro, en Valdivia se logró el quórum, como había comentado anteriormente, que es más del 50% de las carreras totales de la universidad adhirió al BDS. Y un poco para que entiendan la diferencia, porque dependiendo del territorio y de la universidad, hay procesos totalmente distintos. Estos procesos no se llevaron de forma igual en cada universidad, porque son realidades muy distintas. Entonces, en Valdivia, por ejemplo, había un trabajo de lobby de años anteriores, hubo reuniones entre el embajador incluso de Palestina en Chile, con el rector de la Universidad Austral de Chile. Han habido muchas actividades de ese tipo, y el trabajo informativo también, que fue de 3 años desde atrás al presente, digamos, logró que finalmente la mayoría de los estudiantes se declararan un espacio libre de apartheid, y esta resolución obliga a todas y a todos los estudiantes. En la Universidad Austral de Chile queremos desarrollar el BDS en los 3 estamentos universitarios, perdón. Estudiantes, académicos y también funcionarios y trabajadores. Respecto a los académicos, logramos que más de 70 profesores firmaran la carta de adhesión al BDS. Y esta campaña se realizó a fines del año, o sea, durante el año pasado, perdón, y todavía vamos a seguir en ese proceso. Y finalmente, respecto a los funcionarios y trabajadores, no se ha logrado todavía una cohesión para poder tener también la adhesión de este estamento universitario. Y respecto a la Universidad Católica, que también la comenté delante, esta universidad logró finalmente también avanzar en el proceso, pero tuvo las complicaciones fuertes respecto a la Federación de Estudiantes Judíos. Esta federación tiene igual harto poder, por lo que sabemos, dentro de la Universidad Católica, y enviaron ellos a su presidente y a otros miembros que son de otras universidades a debatir con la Organización de Solidaridad con Palestina. Pidieron presentar su postura, atrasaron la votación, y finalmente un grupo de profesores judíos también insultaron a este grupo, publicaban muchos mensajes de odio en contra de esta organización. Fue una campaña ardua y hostil, pero de todas maneras, a pesar de todo, la campaña fue un éxito, y el día de la votación la moción presentada por la Organización de Solidaridad con Palestina ganó con 37 votos a favor, 2 en contra y 22 abstenciones. Ese fue el resultado del proceso de la Universidad Católica, la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, donde también hay otra realidad muy distinta, ¿cierto? Porque estos grupos sionistas tienen harto poder en estos espacios. Y esas fueron finalmente las 3 campañas que hoy en día siguen en proceso. Yo creo que es muy bueno aprender de los otros también y de las experiencias de otros países, como lo que ha pasado también en Estados Unidos, ¿cierto? Y por lo tanto vamos a seguir trabajando en esta campaña para lograr que finalmente la universidad, ¿cierto? No solo los estudiantes, ojalá logremos que las universidades como instituciones se declaren un espacio libre de apartheid. Y todo esto en concordancia con los tratados internacionales de derechos humanos, que deben ser respetados no solo por el Estado chileno, sino que también por las instituciones privadas, y más aún una universidad, que es un espacio de desarrollo del conocimiento tan importante. Por eso es muy importante visibilizar lo que ocurre en Palestina, en este territorio de Chile, donde habemos una numerosa comunidad palestina, pero no solo llegar a la comunidad palestina, sino que a toda la sociedad chilena y a todas las organizaciones de derechos humanos con las que podamos trabajar en adelante. Así que eso, agradezco mucho el espacio, es un honor también estar con ustedes, y eso, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We still have 2 more speakers to go, and I'm really keen to open it up for discussion and questions from the audience. So if we can try to keep it as short as we can, and anything we can elaborate on during question answer. So, and Darishti, you're next.
Amazing. Yes, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I just wanted to outline 2 strengths of our campaigns and 2 challenges. So the one strength we really had was support from a variety of student groups. So we made it our mission to really reach out to the variety of student organizations that were around to educate each other and build bonds together. So for example, The lead organizations were Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace, but we also had such great endorsements from over 41 organizations, including the Black Student Union, the Queer Alliance, the Brown Asian Systems Empowered, the Labor Alliance, the Environmental Justice Group, so much more. The second strength that we really had was historicizing the act of divestment. So, our divestment campaign follows in the footsteps of other successful divestment campaigns that have, pressured the university to withdraw the investment. So, for example, in the past, our students have successfully rallied for divestment from the tobacco industry or the genocide in Sudan. And even now, our peers are encouraging divestment from organizations and companies that destroy the environment or rely on prison labor, for example. Two quick challenges that I want to mention is institutional tricks. So at some point after the student referendum, we heard there was a proposed motion from the faculty actually at our university to dismantle ACRIP, which was the organization that hears divestment procedures, and replace it with another forum that ultimately had a lot of problems. One, that it increased the influence of our president on decision making, who was vocally anti-divestment. It also made the scope of the committee so large, ultimately rendering it dysfunctional. So, for example, these 8 members of the committee only meet for 1 hour once a month, right? So you can't put like 10 agenda items on their plate because they're never going to get to it. And ultimately, what they did at this new order was to actually overburden them. But ultimately, we organized a lot and we highlighted all these institutional tricks to the student body and our professors, and we staged some protests, and ultimately it failed. That proposed motion failed, and the committee remained as is. And as I mentioned earlier, it voted to support divestment. The last challenge we still have is COVID-19. So the last step of divestment at Brown is ultimately we need a vote from the corporation, from the official corporation of the university to vote for divestment. And we're at that last stage. That's the only thing we need. And with COVID, because students are not on campus, because the corporation which meets on campus usually is not there, it's really making it difficult for us to organize with them and reach out to them. And we're still trying to figure that out a little bit. And we hope that we will start figuring it out, and we'll start understanding a little bit better of how we can organize in a digital space as well. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's precisely why we've put this conference together, is to start collectively having that conversation about what do we do in this context with some campuses closed, not being able to get to campuses. And with that, Jeremy?
Great, thanks. I'll keep it brief as well. There's 3 points I want to make, 3 lessons that we've learned from the academic boycott campaign at UCT, and things we did and things we should have done. The first builds on what Drashti's already said. The university, its primary defense mechanism is bureaucracy, and it just overwhelms you with bureaucracy. Sends you from one office to another office to another office, and one forum to another committee to another forum. And ostensibly, just persistence and dedication would overcome that. But because we're university students, you're only at the university for a set amount of time. Time is really not on the student side. In the UCT experience, we began the campaign in 2016, and it's still running now in 2020. An average degree lasts 4 years. If you had started campaigning on the first day you arrived as a first year, you would graduate without seeing the end of the campaign. And so the lesson really, what we've learned from that is either if there's enough power to really sort of force the university's hand, so they can't play these kind of games and tricks with you, or otherwise, as we learned, you really need to build a sustainable movement. Sort of, as soon as you start launching one campaign, you need to start another campaign about finding who is going to take over once you graduate. almost need to be doing those simultaneously. There's no time to waste for students. The second lesson we learned is it's always useful, certainly in the academic boycott campaign, I'm sure in all other campaigns, divestment campaigns as well, not to play or not to show all your cards up front. We went to lots of meetings with one motion, one proposal, particularly the last definitive council meeting, we went with one academic boycott motion and had put all our effort into that. What I think really would have helped, and in retrospect, I think would have made a big difference, is if up our sleeves we had a second, not necessarily a compromise motion, not necessarily the minimal position, just an alternative motion that we could raise at that meeting that could take the Zionist lobby by surprise. And if in that meeting on assessment you need to reconsider, then you've got that up your sleeve. And then the final lesson we learned is really certainly the University of Cape Town and most other South African universities, I imagine internationally as well. The university is increasingly become a corporation, and there are only really two things we found it to respect: finances and the law. And the argument for finances favor the Palestinian struggle. There are a lot of Zionist funders, certainly of our university, and I imagine of many other universities. And so the argument is constantly put, if the university adopts this boycott motion, then it will be economically crippled. And so it's difficult to overcome that on with an economic argument. What one can do, what we learned, is the university also respects the law, and there's a strong legal case to be made in favor. Camilla was also making this point. There's a strong legal case to be made in favor of the Palestinian struggle, international law, in South Africa, domestic law as well. And we found is an effective way with which to counter the financial and economic argument that is constantly barraged by the Zionist lobby at the university. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those very thoughtful remarks that really sort of foresee some of the questions that we're already getting on the chat. I wanted to stress before opening up the question and answer, though, is one of the strengths of the academic boycott and divestment campaigns is their focus on complicity rather than identity. And there's always a push to make this an identitarian conflict or one about religion, when in reality it's very much a modern conflict about land and settler colonialism. And the strength of the campaign and the BDS movement in general has really been to always stress that this is about institutional complicity in sustaining the infrastructure of settler colonialism and illegal occupation. And just this emphasis makes it very difficult to drag us into these more identitarian type of arguments around religion, of course, when what we're speaking about is social justice, economic justice, freedom from occupation, and an end to settler colonialism. And this question of complicity is really central to how we've managed to win campaigns, especially when it comes to divestment and speaking about corporations, but also the institutional complicity of academic institutions in Israel. And there's always a push to say this is about individuals, this is around academic freedom, when in reality it's Palestinian academic freedom that is always under attack. It's Palestinian society, Palestinian students. If you look at how many Palestinian students are in Israeli jails, how many are harassed and arrested, and even the very physical destruction of schools and university buildings, you start to see that what we're actually speaking about is the destruction of Palestinian university life, as well as Palestinian life in general. And I think this juxtaposition when we're speaking about academic freedom is really important to always foreground our work with that. One of the best questions that I always love, and I think it's a very good way to start the conversation, is always around this issue of how to involve new students who may not be convinced, how to reach out beyond our circles and try to convince students who may not know much about Palestine or may not be politically involved at all. And the second aspect to that is, of course, and you touched upon this, Jeremy, is continuity. How do we make sure there is sustainability in our organizing? So if you can all reflect on that, that would be amazing. And Anwar, should we start with you?
Yes, I think that as Camila was saying before, so our first work in university was dedicated to the information. No? So we gave a lot of information to the students. We organized a lot of events talking about what's happening in Palestine, why we talk about apartheid, what is the BDS movement. And then we talked about action and what we can do. I think that this is the best strategy if you want to gain supporters in the university, because every student have to be aware of what he is doing and what his action can. How can his action change what's happening inside his university? And so I think that the best way is to give information about what's happening in Palestine, what is the BDS, and after to take action, and about how you can get involved with more students. I think that the intersectional point of view in our strategy, it's very important, because you have to create a lot of links, not just we don't have to talk just about Palestine, because Palestine has a lot of links with the feminist mobilization, with the LGBTQ plus rights, with the Black Lives Matter community. So we have to create a lot of links, and we have to let people understand that when we talk about Palestine, we are not just talking about Palestine, but we are talking about an international and an intersectional question and issue. And I think that this is the best strategy to talk about Palestine University.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Thanks. Yeah, very important question. I think just echo and reiterate what Anwar said, but perhaps let me also add to that. What we found at UCT is students sort of gravitate and move towards campaigns that are on the move, that are already established as well. And so while of course it's important to ground, and perhaps before you start the campaign have some kind of educational drive, always what was also one of the great unexpected benefits of our academic workout campaign is, as we launched the campaign, as it drew more attention and became more exciting, more students were drawn to it, more people wanted to know what was going on and wanted to be involved, and more easily could see how being involved, as Anna said, how their involvement would make an impact as the campaign progressed along and made some substantial impact itself. So I think always when you do launch whatever campaign you're launching, always keep in mind that it's also a fantastic opportunity to draw students into the movement, and that's almost reason enough to initiate campaigns, but be open to it and be prepared for it, I think.
Any suggestions on sustainability? You mentioned earlier almost being ready right away. Yeah,
I wish I could give tested and proven solutions to sustainability. It's been a stumbling block at UCT as well. I think where we perhaps went wrong is sort of spent some time establishing the campaign and having quite a sort of narrow and almost blanket focus on the campaign that we were launching. At least in my experience, it's difficult to think about the university after your graduation, certainly when you're in first or second year, when it seems so far away. But really, that's when you have to be start to think about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Camilla?
Bueno, yo concuerdo con Anwar y Jeremy. Creo que lo primero es la información, el poder hacer actividades de todo tipo. Pueden ser charlas, talleres, conversatorios, protestas, de distintas formas, presentar documentales, debates, todo tipo de actividades que puedan darse en el espacio universitario, porque el espacio universitario tiene incidencia en la sociedad en general. Entonces, creo que es muy importante el BDS académico y que sigamos aprendiendo también de las otras experiencias para poder llevar a cabo campañas exitosas. Creo que son procesos largos, eso sí. Yo no creo que en un mes o en un corto tiempo tú puedas lograr una campaña exitosa. Yo creo que no es necesario apurarse tampoco, sino que desarrollar procesos largos donde efectivamente la gente se concientice, la gente tome conciencia de la causa palestina y sienta que es también suya, que la resistencia del pueblo palestino, para mí lo que representa el pueblo palestino es un pueblo heroico, es un pueblo que puede ser un gran ejemplo de lucha en cuanto a la lucha por la autodeterminación de los pueblos y por derechos tan básicos como la dignidad, igualdad y justicia, como lo más básico. Creo que es un ejemplo para el mundo, creo que podemos hacer que este movimiento realmente sea de solidaridad internacional, pero de los ciudadanos, de los pueblos, de las personas, más que de los gobiernos y de los estados que realmente no toman posición. Por lo tanto, sí, creo que estas formas de información primero, participación y luego acción, es la única manera de lograr que se lleven a cabo estas campañas y pensando que son procesos largos, que no es rápido y además para poder lograr que la institución misma se declare libre de apartheid puede tomar varios años. Eso, yo creo que por ahí puede ser la forma de llevar a cabo las campañas.
Darashti, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for these wonderful questions. In terms of new students, it's very critical, and I would echo what everyone said, that to include them in the process, because we need this, majoritarian pull for a referendum. And we have to be very cognizant that students are coming at very different exposure levels to not only issues around the world, but just generally, social advocacy and all this like language that comes around with it, right? So what we tried to do was, produce our material in a very accessible manner, right? Not assuming that people know, certain dates or certain terminology that comes with talking about Palestine solidarity work. And what we did throughout our entire process since launching up until the vote is we held numerous teach-ins that were very, very accessible at times, different times of the week, and really to not only introduce ourselves of the human faces behind a campaign, but to talk about this issue in depth and to open room for conversation. We also had a live Gmail account, in the sense like organization emails that people could always reach out to understand more. We also did flyering throughout the entire process of literally just going places in campus with our literature of what we are, with our QR code to our website, to really just approach people and say, hey, have you heard about our campaign? And we really asked them questions about things they wanted to know or that they didn't know, right? Asking questions instead of lecturing to someone about something is far more effective, because you get to tap into their knowledge base to understanding what the lack is and what the gap is. Finally, in terms of your second question about sustainability, this was key, right? Because in the US, we're at university for 4 years. And after that, you have to keep it going, right? The campaign and the university is intentional about kind of waiting until the next class graduates so that it dips back down our campaign effort. So what we did is we had a very organized structure in the sense of all of our documents and material, and we made sure to share it with everyone, even the first years and second years and whatnot. And we always, someone from our university, actually a group of students, created a report on all activism on campus, every single activism, whether that was environmental justice, Palestine solidarity work, ultimately to keep a record of what was happening. So if you're new to the university and you're trying to figure out what's happening, you get this entire report that's in a very accessible, funny, approachable manner in which you can understand what's happening and get plugged in really quickly. So really making those systematic processes to make sure that all of your knowledge gets passed down to the next person and gets improved upon, and there's new creative ways in which we move forward together.
Absolutely. I know it sounds really silly to say, but I was amazed at how many student groups hadn't filed any of the documents or the research they found for year to year. So, get a box, get a file. It could be online, but it's important to keep these documents, including the posters and the brochures. I also found that having a bit of a buddy system really works between, fourth year students and first year students to do that kind of training, and not wait until the last week of term to start doing that, but right at the beginning of the year, to ensure that there's continuity in that way. So it's really very systematic work for this sustainability. We have another question that's a little more detailed around how do we actually find the information on complicity, because it takes a bit of research and it's different per country and per campus. In the UK, for example, there's freedom of information requests, but it's still difficult to get a hold of this information. So I wanted to start with you, Darashti, because of the Brown campaign and divestment, around what ways would you advise for people to find this kind of information?
Sure, and this is a tricky concept. Also, sorry for the background noise. I'm in New York City, so it's always noisy here. So in terms of financial transparency, this was a huge issue during our campaign. I mean, Brown is a private institution, so they don't publicize its investments, its investment portfolio, right? So we were actually unaware of the extent to which Brown invested in the certain corporations we had listed. We knew that, and we kind of worked around it because we outlined the ways in which those companies engaged in human rights violations and how we were connected. So specifically, we saw contracts on the campus, or we knew that certain universities certain corporations were a major component of portfolios in a variety of universities in the US. So while we were calling for divestment from the companies, we were also simultaneously calling for greater financial transparency from Brown regarding the corporations and regarding just the system, right? So we kind of set up a lot of meetings between people who knew a little bit more about the financial aspects, because that is a difficult side of divestment campaign work to kind of understand. And if you don't understand it, the university uses that to kind of subdue your efforts. So in that way, to be honest, we had to have a lot of meetings with a variety of stakeholders who knew a little bit more about that financial background of Brown. But yeah.
Jeremy?
Thanks. For the academic boycott, it's really focused on complicit Israeli universities, and I think perhaps that might be a lot easier because it's a limited number, and the research has been done. There are fantastic resources that are available online on the PACB website. I was just scrambling to try and find the authors' names. I can't, but it's also available online. A book that details the offences and the complicity of various Israeli universities and what particular activities they partake in. And so it's quite easy to figure out and track which Israeli universities are complicit and to what extent they are complicit. It really is all online. It's just a Google away.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing to all of these resources. I think sometimes people tend to try and reinvent the wheel each time, but certainly PACB has very good resources and detailed research on most of the complicit universities. Camilla?
Sí, respecto a información sobre las campañas o las complicidades de las universidades, obviamente las mismas páginas de PACBI, pero también tenemos páginas de nuestras organizaciones, de la UGEP Chile, que está en Facebook y también en Instagram, y ahí es donde se publican también todos los resultados de la campaña de BDS académico, y la información sobre qué universidades son cómplices y qué universidades están involucradas, o sea, tienen convenios, perdón, con la Universidad de Chile y la Católica. Lo que pasa es que en Chile dos de las tres universidades que mencioné, que es la Católica y la Universidad de Chile, tienen convenios con universidades israelíes que lucran del apartheid. Pero la Universidad Austral de Chile, la de Valdivia, no tiene convenios con universidades israelíes hasta el momento. No existen intercambios o convenios entre esas universidades, pero sí se lleva a cabo igual la campaña para informar y para que a futuro la Universidad Austral de Chile no genere ningún tipo de convenio con universidades israelíes que lucren de la parte. Entonces, esta información, incluso los resultados del proceso, están también en las páginas de BDS desde el sur, BDS Chile, BDS Valdivia también, y en estas páginas que son de redes sociales pueden encontrar los documentos también y la información que podemos nosotros hacer llegar para que conozcan cómo se llevaron a cabo nuestras campañas. De hecho, en la de Valdivia, de la Universidad Austral de Chile, se sacó un conversatorio, un foro como este, donde se expuso todos los resultados de la campaña y todos los detalles del proceso llevado a cabo. Así que eso, esas serían como las páginas de información acá, al menos en Chile.
Thank you so much, Camilla. It's always so important to recognize the differences of geographies as well. Anwar?
Okay, so as I was saying before, we were more lucky because there was a call launched by professors, and in this call called Stop Technion, there was also the details of what Technion is really doing in Palestine and how is linked with the apartheid regime. But we wanted to ask our university what they are doing with the Technion, no? So we asked many offices in our universities to give us information about what was happening with Technion. It was a very difficult experience because we had to ask a lot of students association to help us, and this is a very important point because this is why the link with the Students' Council and other association is important, because they could help us in this action. The university gave us some answer. They also wrote on a newspaper that they were collaborating with Technion because Technion is able to grow tomatoes in the desert, something like that, and so we started to search on the internet and on the social networks and platforms about what's happening in the Israeli university. And I think that this is a very important point, because nowadays, if you want to start a campaign, a boycott campaign, it's really more easy, and it's you can find everything on the social networks and platforms. And this is an amazing way because we could really open our boycott campaign to every university in the world.
Fantastic. Thank you for that very hopeful note that you ended on, that it's actually a lot easier nowadays, and it certainly is. And we have to remember our movement is actually not that old. We're just at the beginning in terms of, if you think of social movement life, and we're at this stage where we can pick up and start BDS campaigns, boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns on our campuses, and have other experiences to learn from. And this is precisely what this conference is about, to learn from each other's experiences, to connect across our different geographies, and to also, just see each other, and even though it's virtual, to just be able to put faces to the people and the organizing. You all and all the groups you belong to commit so much time to what you do. So it's very important that we're able to connect on that human level as well. We've come to time, and I wanted to thank everyone who's been with us this entire time. The entire conversation was recorded, and you'll be able to see it on Facebook. Please do share it with the rest of your student group or academic groups, so they can hear the discussion as well. It can be used as an educational tool too, to hear all of these different examples. There are still upcoming plenaries in the conference. I hope you can attend them. I realized we didn't get to every single one of the questions. There were a few questions around attacks and how do we resist attacks. I think the speakers have touched upon this, but it's always important to remember that all social movements get attacked, and it's actually one of the ways to gauge our strength. If we were being ignored and not attacked, it would mean we're actually not trying to change the status quo and not trying to do anything. So we need to see that these attacks are actually there to silence us, and to think through how to keep focused on the goal. The point of these attacks is to waste our time, to get us engaging in different kinds of conversations, and we need to really keep our eye on the ball and keep thinking through how do we actually divest. If our goal is divestment and ending this complicity, is to make sure that we focus on that and keep our energies focused on that. And at the end of the day, this kind of attack and the silencing campaigns are part and parcel of how settler colonialism operates. And we have to remember that we are speaking about a military occupation and decades of settler colonialism that have aimed to destroy an entire people. So of course there will be silencing, and of course with the spirit of resistance of the Palestinian people and all of those fighting for justice everywhere, we will continue to beat back those attacks, as every person on this call has said so far. So on November 14th, there'll be another panel, Education Not for Sale, Fighting Racism and Capitalism. You have to love that title. And on November 15th, there's another panel, Demilitarize Our Campuses, Ending Repression at Universities. And I think we'll be able to have a lot more of those conversations. There's space that will be opened up also for students to get together across different regions and to meet each other. So heartfelt thank you from me to every one of our speakers today. Thank you so much, Jeremy, Darashti, Camilla, and Anwar, for talking to us about your experiences so thoughtfully and so coherently and in time. I'm really sorry if I had to rush you. And thanks to everybody who joined us. And once more, thanks to all the organizers for all the behind the scenes work. And see everybody at the other panels. Bye.